An alpha may choose a bride for power, but the moon remembers the woman he betrayed. The words came from an old song Evelyn Carter's mother used to sing, though no one in the crowded great hall seemed interested in remembering them tonight. Beneath crystal chandeliers and silver banners, nearly 300 guests waited for Alpha Damien Cross to announce the woman who would stand beside him as Luna. Evelyn stood 6 feet from the ceremonial platform, wearing a simple ivory dress and the Moonstone pendant her grandmother had left her. Across the aisle, her twin sister Vanessa wore the midnight blue gown that had been fitted for Evelyn only a week earlier. The sisters shared the same pale complexion, dark brown hair, and gray eyes, but no one had ever confused their place in the family. Vanessa was the charming one, the celebrated one, the daughter their father proudly introduced to powerful guests. Evelyn was the dependable one, called upon when someone needed comfort, discretion, or sacrifice. Still, she had believed tonight would be different. Damien had spent months speaking to her in quiet hallways and moonlit gardens, promising that when the council demanded a political marriage, he would choose the woman who knew his heart. 10 minutes before the ceremony, Vanessa had entered Evelyn's dressing room and calmly revealed that Damien's decision had already been changed. "For the strength of our packs and the future of our people," he announced, "I claim Vanessa Carter as my chosen Luna." Applause rolled through the hall, but Evelyn heard only the quiet crack of trust breaking inside her. Vanessa walked past with a victorious smile and placed her hand in Damien's. When Evelyn met his eyes, he looked almost ashamed. Almost. She stepped forward before fear could silence her. "Was any of it real?" she asked. The applause stopped. Damien's jaw tightened. "Feelings do not build kingdoms, Evelyn." "No," she replied, her voice steady enough to carry across the room. "But lies can destroy them." A murmur spread among the guests. Damien lowered his voice. "An alpha cannot build a throne with love." Before Evelyn could answer, a deep growl echoed beyond the closed doors. The great hall fell silent. The doors swung open, and Alpha King Rowan Blackwood stood beneath the archway, his dark coat dusted with snow, his expression unreadable. His gaze passed over Damien, Vanessa, and the council before settling on Evelyn. Something ancient and powerful shifted in the room. Rowan took one step forward and said, "Then perhaps you were never worthy of a throne." Vanessa finally stepped forward with a graceful smile that had won over countless noble families. "Your Majesty, surely you understand that leadership sometimes requires practical decisions." Rowan looked at her politely, but without warmth. Practical decisions should never require dishonor. The words landed harder than any accusation. Damien opened his mouth to respond, but Lord Carter quickly stepped between them with an uneasy laugh. "Perhaps tonight should remain a celebration. We are honored by your unexpected visit." Rowan accepted neither the apology nor the distraction. Instead, he turned toward Evelyn. "Miss Carter, may I ask you one question?" She hesitated only briefly before answering. "Yes, Your Majesty. If you had known this choice had already been made, would you have stood here tonight?" The question surprised everyone, including Evelyn herself. She thought about the dress Vanessa had taken, the whispered promises Damien had broken, and the hundreds of eyes that had watched her humiliation without speaking. Finally, she answered honestly, "No, I would have chosen my dignity instead." Something almost resembling approval crossed Rowan's face before disappearing again. She had expected sympathy at most, never intervention. Yet Rowan did not look at her as though she were someone in need of rescue. Instead, he looked at her as though he were trying to understand something only he could sense. As servants quietly cleared untouched goblets from the long banquet table, Rowan stepped closer to Evelyn, lowering his voice enough that only those nearest could hear. "There is something around your neck that has been silent for generations." Instinctively, Evelyn touched the Moonstone pendant resting against her collarbone. It felt strangely warm beneath her fingertips. Before she could ask what he meant, the pale stone shimmered with a faint silver glow that lasted only a second. Several elders noticed it immediately, their expressions changing from confusion to unmistakable alarm. Rowan did not appear surprised. He simply inclined his head toward Evelyn and said, "Keep it with you tonight. Do not let anyone persuade you to surrender it." Then he turned toward the stunned council. "Tomorrow morning, after sunrise, I will convene a royal assembly. There are truths that should have been spoken years ago, and I believe they are ready to reveal themselves. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from those who believe they deserve what belongs to someone else. Before Evelyn could ask another question, the woman excused herself. Nearly an hour later, Evelyn entered the Grand Council chamber. Unlike the lavish banquet hall, this room felt solemn and timeless, its circular walls lined with carved stone wolves representing every alpha territory in the kingdom. Damien stood beside Lord Carter, while Vanessa maintained the same elegant posture she always displayed before important guests, although the confidence in her eyes seemed less certain than it had been the night before. Rowan stood alone near the center of the chamber. The moment Evelyn stepped inside, his attention shifted toward her as naturally as though he had been expecting only her arrival. "Thank you for coming," he said. Evelyn inclined her head politely. "I was told you wished to speak with me." Rowan looked toward the assembled council before answering. "With all of you." One of the senior elders cleared his throat. Rowan stepped closer but stopped several feet away, careful not to invade her space. "Neither do I. Not completely. That is why I asked you here instead of making declarations." His honesty surprised her more than any grand speech could have. He was not pretending to possess every answer. He was searching alongside her. Rowan slowly extended his hand, leaving several feet of distance between them. "Miss Carter, if you are willing, place the pendant in your palm." Evelyn hesitated only briefly before unclasping the silver chain. The moonstone rested against her skin, cool and perfectly smooth. As soon as she lifted it into the open air, soft silver light flowed through the crystal once again, brighter than before. Ancient symbols hidden in the stone slowly appeared across its surface. The council members gasped. Even Damien took an involuntary step backward. Rowan never looked at the pendant. His eyes remained fixed on Evelyn. "It is responding to you," he said quietly. "Not because someone commanded it, but because it recognizes the woman carrying it." Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. "What does that mean?" Rowan answered with complete sincerity. "It means I have spent 12 years searching for the owner of that pendant, and until yesterday, I believed I would never find her." The chamber remained silent long after Rowan's final words settled over the council. Ancient stories are often misunderstood. Before Rowan could respond, one of the oldest council elders slowly stood from his chair. His hands trembled as he studied the glowing pendant. "I have seen those symbols before," he whispered. I turned toward him. "Where?" Rowan asked. The elder looked toward the vaulted ceiling as though reaching through decades of memory. "In the royal archives, more than 40 years ago. The carvings described the Moon Court and the queen who united rival packs without conquest. They also spoke of a sacred heirloom that would awaken only when its guardian chose truth over comfort." Evelyn lowered her eyes to the pendant resting in her palm. She had worn it since childhood because her grandmother insisted it never leave her neck. She had always believed it was nothing more than a treasured family keepsake. "My grandmother told me it would guide me when I needed courage," Evelyn said quietly. She never mentioned queens or ancient covenants. Rowan's expression softened. "Perhaps she was protecting you until the right time." Damien stepped forward for the first time since the meeting began. His voice carried genuine confusion rather than pride. "If any of this is true, why was it hidden? Why would someone conceal something so important?" Rowan answered without hesitation. "Because history teaches us that power attracts those who seek to possess it. Sometimes the safest place for a priceless treasure is where no one thinks to look." Evelyn noticed Vanessa watching the pendant instead of her. "During that time, our historians will examine every record connected to the Moonstone, and you will have complete freedom to decide your own future once every answer available has been uncovered." The proposal stunned the room. Vanessa immediately protested. "You expect her to leave with you simply because of an old legend?" Rowan calmly replied, "No, I expect nothing." Then he looked only at Evelyn. "You owe me nothing. You owe the council nothing. If you refuse, I will personally see you returned home in safety, and this conversation ends. If you accept, it will be because the decision belongs entirely to you." For the first time in her life, no one was telling Evelyn what she should become, whom she should marry, or which sacrifice would benefit the family. The choice belonged to her alone. She closed her fingers around the warm moonstone and drew a slow breath. "I will come," she said, "but I am not promising anyone my future. I am only searching for the truth." A faint smile appeared on Rowan's face. one filled with relief rather than triumph. "That," he said, "is the only answer I hoped to hear." Across the chamber, Vanessa quietly clenched her hands beneath the folds of her gown, while no one noticed the brief reflection of silver light flicker across the polished floor outside the open doorway, as though someone hidden beyond the hall had been listening to every word. Evelyn expected the journey to the royal palace to feel like the beginning of a fairy tale. It was magnificent without appearing cold, and as Evelyn crossed the great courtyard, she noticed something unexpected. Servants greeted Rowan with respect, but they smiled naturally instead of shrinking in fear. Stable hands laughed with palace guards. Children carried baskets through the gardens, while elderly caretakers offered quiet advice. The atmosphere felt nothing like the rigid household where she had grown up. Rowan noticed her observing the people around them. "What do you see?" he asked. Evelyn answered honestly. "No one looks afraid of disappointing you." Rowan looked across the courtyard before replying. Others insisted she was merely an ordinary woman caught in an extraordinary misunderstanding. Evelyn tried to ignore the rumors, reminding herself that 30 days would pass quickly. One crisp afternoon, while returning from the library with several copied manuscripts, she noticed a familiar figure standing near the palace fountain. Vanessa smiled as though nothing painful had ever happened between them. "You seem comfortable here," Vanessa said pleasantly. Evelyn remained cautious. "Why are you here?" "Father asked me to deliver family documents that might help the historians." Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I also wanted to congratulate you. You finally have everyone's attention." The compliment sounded strangely hollow. Evelyn searched her sister's face, unable to decide whether she was sincere or performing for unseen listeners. "Attention is not the same as happiness," Evelyn replied. Vanessa's smile lingered for only a moment before fading. "Be careful, Evelyn. Palaces have a way of making people believe they are more important than they truly are." Without waiting for an answer, Vanessa walked toward the eastern corridor. As Evelyn watched her disappear, a quiet uneasiness settled over her. She could not explain why, but something about the conversation felt rehearsed. That evening, while placing the Moonstone beside her bedside lamp, she noticed the pendant glowing once again. This time the silver light did not shine toward the window or the doorway. It pointed directly toward the eastern wing of the palace, where visitors were never permitted to stay after sunset. For several long minutes, Evelyn remained beside the window, watching the narrow beam of silver light stretching from the Moonstone toward the eastern wing before slowly fading into the darkness. In the royal library, shelves rose nearly 30 feet high, filled with journals that recorded the history of every Alpha territory for centuries. Rowan was already there, studying a collection of weathered maps with two historians. When he noticed Evelyn approaching, he closed the ancient volume without hesitation. "Did you sleep well?" he asked. She considered hiding the truth, but decided against it. The Moonstone glowed again last night. Rowan's expression immediately grew serious. Did it react to anyone? Not a person. A place. She glanced toward the tall windows overlooking the palace grounds. The eastern wing. Rowan exchanged a brief look with the oldest historian before turning back to her. "That section has been closed for decades except for a handful of storage rooms and archival chambers." Evelyn studied his face carefully. "You sound as though you are not completely certain." A faint smile crossed his lips. A wise king learns to avoid pretending he knows everything. His answer earned the first genuine smile Evelyn had offered in days. Rowan reached for another dusty journal and opened it to a faded illustration of the Moonstone. According to these records, the pendant does not simply reveal secrets. It responds to choices. Every time its light appears, someone nearby is standing at a crossroads between honesty and deception. Professor Silas Kane. The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but she noticed the historians exchanging uneasy glances. The oldest finally spoke. "Professor Kane has spent years searching for records connected to the Moon Court. Brilliant man. Very persuasive. Some believe he is more interested in forgotten power than forgotten history." Rowan thanked the attendant and dismissed him before looking back at Evelyn. "I had hoped your stay here would remain peaceful." "Peace without truth does not last," she replied quietly. Rowan nodded with unmistakable respect. "No, it does not." Later that afternoon, Evelyn walked alone through the palace gardens, hoping the fresh winter air would clear her thoughts. As she approached the frozen lake, She noticed two distant figures standing beneath an old cedar tree. One was unmistakably Vanessa. The other wore a dark traveling cloak with the hood pulled low. They spoke only briefly before exchanging a folded piece of parchment. When Vanessa turned toward the palace, the cloaked stranger disappeared through a narrow stone gate leading directly toward the eastern wing. Evelyn hurried forward, but by the time she reached the gate, both figures were gone. She looked down and noticed a single object resting on the snow where the stranger had stood. It was a silver button engraved with the same crescent symbol that had appeared on the Moonstone only days earlier. As Evelyn picked it up, the pendant around her neck became warm once again, and for the first time a quiet voice echoed inside her mind, clear enough to understand yet impossible to explain. Evelyn almost declined the invitation, but curiosity persuaded her to attend. The grand dining hall felt warmer than it had during the interrupted ceremony days earlier. Candles reflected against polished windows, musicians played gentle melodies, and conversations drifted from history to trade as though the kingdom carried no hidden burdens. Rowan greeted every guest with the same calm courtesy, whether they were nobles or librarians. When Evelyn entered, he simply smiled and motioned toward the empty seat beside one of the historians rather than beside himself. Once again, he refused to place her at the center of unwanted attention. During the meal, Professor Silas Kane finally introduced himself. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with neatly combed silver hair and thoughtful gray eyes behind thin spectacles. His voice was warm and measured, the kind that immediately inspired confidence. "Miss Carter," he said pleasantly, "I have spent decades studying the Moon Court. Meeting the owner of the Moonstone is the greatest privilege of my career." Evelyn thanked him politely, yet the silver button hidden inside her pocket seemed strangely heavy. "Have you ever seen the pendant awaken before?" she asked. Professor Kane smiled with perfect composure. Rowan appeared calm as he handed the woman a folded document. Evelyn felt her heart sink. Had everything he said about honesty and choice been another carefully crafted performance? She stepped back before either of them noticed her and hurried into the corridor, unable to silence the questions racing through her mind. She had trusted Rowan because he had never demanded her faith. Now she wondered whether that trust had been misplaced. Sleep never came that night. At sunrise, Evelyn walked alone through the eastern gardens, trying to clear her thoughts. As she rounded a hedge covered with climbing roses, Rowan approached from the opposite path. He greeted her with his usual quiet smile, but Evelyn noticed something different immediately. He was carrying the same folded document she had seen him give away only hours earlier. Confused, she looked from the paper to his face. Rowan stopped a respectful distance away. "You seem troubled," he said gently. Evelyn searched his eyes before asking the question she could no longer keep inside. "Last night, who was the woman wearing my face?" Rowan did not answer immediately. Instead, genuine surprise crossed his expression, followed by a slow realization that made him look toward the eastern wing of the palace. "So," he said quietly, "it has already begun." Rowan glanced toward the eastern wing for several silent seconds before returning his attention to Evelyn. "I did not know they would act so quickly." Instead of offering excuses, he reached into his coat and unfolded the very document he had been carrying in the garden. "This is the same paper you saw last night." Evelyn recognized the royal seal immediately. "Then why is it still with you?" Rowan handed it to her. The parchment was completely blank except for the official seal at the bottom. Because it was never meant to contain information. It was a test. Evelyn looked up in confusion. Rowan continued. 3 nights ago, the Royal Archives reported that copies of your clothing measurements had disappeared. Instead, it had been opened with the correct key. "Someone had permission," she said. "Or someone possessed a perfect copy," Rowan replied. The historian carefully unrolled the ancient map across a wooden table. Unlike ordinary maps, this one showed no borders between kingdoms. Instead, delicate silver lines connected dozens of landmarks throughout the realm before ending at a single symbol shaped exactly like the crescent engraved on the silver button Evelyn had found near the eastern gate. She reached into her pocket and quietly placed the button beside the map. The match was exact. Rowan studied it in silence before looking back at her. "Where did you find this?" Evelyn described seeing Vanessa speaking with the cloaked stranger beneath the cedar tree and discovering the button after both had disappeared. The historian's face lost all color. That crest has not been used for over 100 years, he whispered. It belonged to the keepers of the Moon Court. Rowan lowered his voice. According to every official record, that order vanished generations ago. Evelyn looked from the button to the glowing lines on the ancient map as the moonstone beneath her cloak suddenly became warm once again. This time the silver light spread across the parchment itself, stopping on a remote mountain valley marked with a single handwritten note that none of them had noticed before. It read, in faded ink, "Your Majesty, if this valley truly exists, it was removed from every modern chart nearly a century ago." Rowan looked toward Evelyn rather than the map. Then perhaps the valley is not waiting for a king to find it. Before anyone could continue, a young palace messenger hurried into the archive carrying another sealed letter. He bowed respectfully before presenting it to Rowan. This arrived from the western gate only moments ago. Rowan broke the seal and quietly read the message. A thoughtful expression crossed his face before he handed the parchment to Evelyn. It contained only a single sentence. "The Moonstone belongs where the first promise was broken." There was no signature. Evelyn looked up. Who delivered this? The messenger shook his head. A traveler wearing a heavy winter cloak. He left before the guards could ask his name. Rowan folded the note. "She only said that I would recognize her because she would ask difficult questions instead of accepting comfortable answers." Evelyn lowered her eyes with a quiet smile. "That sounds less like a prophecy and more like good advice." Rowan laughed softly. Perhaps it was both. As they stepped into the palace courtyard, snowflakes drifted gently through the afternoon sky. Palace servants prepared for the annual winter light celebration, hanging silver lanterns along stone walkways while children gathered evergreen branches for decorations. For the first time since arriving, Evelyn noticed ordinary joy returning to the palace. Yet beneath that peaceful scene, she sensed invisible threads connecting every unanswered question. Across the courtyard, Vanessa stood beneath an archway watching them from a distance. She smiled warmly and waved as though nothing unusual had ever happened. But this time Evelyn did not judge the gesture by appearances alone. The moonstone resting beneath her cloak became faintly warm once more, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. She finally understood that the pendant was no longer leading her toward hidden places. It was teaching her to see hidden intentions. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered mountains, in a valley erased from every official map, the first promise that had shaped all of their lives was still waiting to be uncovered.